Hello, welcome back to a new session of Sail in Finland Camera Corner. Today we're going to be looking at how to grade Olympus Log 400 material and go from this to this as easily and as quickly as possible. I'm not claiming that I'm telling you the best way to grade this kind of material, but this is my observations on how to grade and also what I find to be the most effective and quick way for me to get acceptable results with Log 400 material. I'm also going to delve a little bit into how the Atomos Ninja actually figures into this equation, and does it actually have then a significant impact on the quality of the final product. But let's start. So let's go over to this thing, and it actually looks kind of interesting. So what is this? So I've actually shot this clip so that I'm filming at the same time or recording at the same time into the camera and into the Ninja. This is quite easy to do. With the Ninja you just set the trigger function to HDMI, and then you enable HDMI triggering in the camera. And then when you actually push the shutter on the EM1, then it starts recording in camera, but it also at the same time triggers the Ninja to start recording. There's a 1 frame delay, so you have to kind of push the Ninja material 1 frame forward in order for the two to then perfectly sync. So this is what I'm actually now showing you here on the screen. There's the 2 different recordings, but I've done that 1 frame sync. So if you look at this, you know, they're quite nicely synced. So what are we seeing? We're seeing now the settings that you would get. This is a color managed timeline. So this is the sort of the standard view that you get in Resolve if you actually input these materials, and this is the automatic analysis that Resolve does of these 2 materials. And as you can see, it looks perhaps like they're very different. But are they actually? So let's dig into this a little bit. So let's look here at this one. So we can see now that the default input color space is Rec 2020. So perhaps if we do something about that, does it change? P3? Where did I get that idea? You'll find out a little bit later. Okay, one more try. Let's see if we change the input color space to project. Oh, now it looks like they're pretty similar. Let's make one more thing. The clip attributes, you know, if it's set to auto, actually it looks like, if I change here, okay, so it doesn't change from auto to video, so the interpretation is that it's video levels. But what if we set it to full? And indeed, interesting. Now that we've set the color management parameters in the same way for both materials, they look the same. So essentially what this is that the data, the video data in the camera recording and in the Ninja recording is essentially the same. The only difference here that you can see is perhaps this slight green tint, and that seems to come from the 422 bit stuffing. So this was recorded in 8-bit 422. So okay, so let's see how does this actually look then. So here are the 2 files. Here's the metadata as shown by media info, and as you can see, here's the Ninja one, and actually, yes, so it says limited, so that's video layer levels, and color primaries, meaning gamut, so Rec 2020. So actually Resolve did exactly what it was supposed to do. It read the metadata and worked according to that. And here's the one that came out of camera. We can see 420, so it can't be from the Ninja. And then here it's actually labeled as Rec 709. So essentially the color management did what it was supposed to do. Okay, let's look at it a little bit more. So here's then the next step in the process. I'm not doing anything to the Ninja input, but I'm applying the Olympus LUT then to the camera material. Let's check now that I have the interesting color space. So I'll just, for interest's sake, I'll keep this as P3. Again, you'll see later why. And what do we see now? Well, this actually looks quite reasonable now with the automatic color management. If I add the LUT to the outer camera material, you can see that actually, well, I hope you can see that the whites here are extremely squashed. So most of the details disappear out of the boat. We can see on this one motorboat here that on this side I can see clearly the hull structure, and on the other side here, which is squashed by the LUT, you know, the whites are just this kind of white blob. So this is one of the reasons why I never really liked the LUT. I think it actually does, you know, a pretty rough job on the material. Okay, so, but is it gradable? And yes, to some degree it is, but it's still quite difficult actually to do both the whites in a nice way and then get a reasonable color in the sky. So this side, you know, is much better. I think, you know, it looks quite nice with a simple grade, and the sky is nice. So these grades were done so that I spent roughly the same amount of time on each. And then the sort of the final step here is, of course, we are being told that you should grade under the LUT. So does that help a lot? So here's now the grade under the LUT. Yes, it perhaps helps a little bit, but still the problem is that the LUT actually does a very bad job here with the whites, and the sky is still problematic green. But okay, this doesn't look too good. So is there something then that we can do to make grading easier? So let's take a look at this other example. And here the starting point is, you know, same outer camera material here, linear material here. This is 10-bit 422. So again, we have this slight greenish tint here, which I'm suspecting again comes from the bit stuffing because of the 10-bit and the 422. If I wouldn't have something to compare with, I wouldn't really notice the green, but now when I can compare the two sides, you know, there's that very, very sort of subtle green tint. So what can we do with this? The next step then is either we can go the LUT way, or then I'm now using a CST with a P3 D65 gamut as the input space and input gamma to the two. We could try some other gammas as well. Doesn't, you know, this one looks, this is now Rec 709 gamma, looks reasonable, or DCI, this also looks reasonable. So if you want to try this out, you know, you can test what actually works then nicely with your material. And on the auto camera side, just have the LUT. Okay, next step. Now, spend a little bit more time grading, trying to get more or less the same quality. And as you can see, you know, I can get more or less the same results, both the LUT route and the CST route. But the difference actually is quite visible here, because in order to actually then fix the sky, I needed to add a qualifier for the sky and separately grade the sky. So it means that actually doing the LUT side took me roughly perhaps for this scene 2 to 3 times longer than grading the CST side. So if I'm thinking about how to get good results quickly and easily, then so far now the LUT side has been much more difficult and has taken a lot more time. Okay, next step. What happens then if we actually give both sides the same treatment, the CST treatment, and the same grade? Well, not surprisingly, they look more or less essentially the same, as they should. The bad thing is that there doesn't seem to be any real benefit from 10-bit or 422, and again, because I kind of know to look for it, there is that small greenish tint here. I can fix it by adding a small grade. Now it's more or less gone. So the grade I added was just, this very small reduction of green in the gamma wheel, and then they ended up looking more or less the same. Okay, next step. Let's just check out. This is now what happens if I'm actually then changing one of them to one of the clips to video. So I'm changing the Ninja one to video like they want to claim that it is, and you can see that actually then you can't use the same grade in this case, which of course is no surprise. Again, it's quite easily fixable. This grade to fix it was just a very mild contrast addition, and again taking a little bit, because this was again the Ninja side, so take a little bit of the green away, and then I'm getting more or less the same result with both the video and the full levels. So you can do it, but there's going to be a small detail a bit later, to actually then show you that I think that it makes sense to use data levels or full levels all the time. So let's change this back to full, and then last step here then is just a small experiment. So what happens if I then change the CST? Now this one I changed the input color space to Rec 709. Again, there's a small difference. This is slightly less contrasted now with the same grade, but again, it's quite easily fixable with just a very kind of simple addition of a little bit of contrast. And now, again, more or less I have the same result. The overall, I should have perhaps done a little bit more to even out the lighting, but more or less, both are extremely passable. So yes, you can go a lot of routes, but then let's take a look then at the new Atom OS 11. So let's first take a look at the user interface of the Ninja Fire with the new Atom OS 11 and when it's connected to an Olympus EM1 Mark II. So the actual reason why I started to investigate this log 400 thing was that Atomos released a new version of their OS system, the Atom OS version 11, and initially it seemed that for the EM1 Mark II, the log 400 might be differently processed. So let's see what happens. I'll turn on my camera here. It doesn't have a lens, so it will just show a black screen here. But you can see now that we have 25 frames per second, and it claims that it's a recording HDR log format, and it's Olympus, and there's the OM log 400 selected. It doesn't actually get the information from the camera, so if I would have set this, for instance, to the flat profile, the Ninja wouldn't know because there's no information exchange on this matter. And this is actually where I picked up then the hint that the P3 gamut might be a good idea because it claims now for some reason that the gamut is P3. So this is where it started. So with that, let's go and check out the media info. And now we can see that at least here something has changed. We can see 422 10-bit, so this is from the Ninja, but actually then the material now is labeled with metadata as Rec 709. So if you would then use this material, this is now the shot that I just recently did with the Atom OS 11. Core managed Resolve would interpret this as Rec 709, and of course because it had limited levels, so it would interpret it as video levels. So let's see what would that look like. We can just change this to video levels for a second. So this would be how it would look like in a color management system. But this is actually now showing you why I think it's always worth using the full level. So check here out in this space here how ugly this sort of highlight area is here. That's where the clouds are being lit up by the sun. And then let's see what happens if I actually change that back then to full level. So now we can see that the starting point here looks much better. So actually now there's not really a badly blown out area here. There's just a very sort of specular sun there, to the way you would like it to be. Again, I can see here the line, so again the slight greenish tint here is visible, due to the Atomos encoding. But other than that, they look exactly the same. Okay, let's go to the next step. Here I'm again working a little bit. I'm just trying out a slightly different CST, so just using HLG as the gamma and the Olympus LUT. And we can again see that the CST route, I don't have anything very badly blown out here, but I have some highlights here that are a bit ugly with the LUT. Of course, I haven't done any grading yet, so let's see what happens. So this is now then a simple grade. This one again I didn't spend all that much time on, but you can see now that even with grading, the LUT actually creates these not so nice blown out areas. Of course, now this is not grading under the LUT, so this is doing the LUT first and the grade afterwards. So you might get a little bit better results doing it in the other way, but clearly here demonstrates that these areas here are a little bit blown out, while on this side, especially the roll-off here into the very bright area here lit by the sun, I think is much nicer here. The roll-off looks much more like, there's not enough dynamic range kind of a situation. Okay, so that was my short introduction to how to grade that. So let's see, what do I think about this? So first, my recommendations. So this is mainly to myself, but if you want to, you can try this thing out. So if you're using a Ninja 5, then in the recorder, I would suggest that you use H.265, just one of the lower quality things. HQ even is a little bit overkill. There's now also MQ medium quality, which more or less creates the same size files as H.264 auto camera. And I don't really see any difference in video quality. LQ, MQ, or HQ, they're all more or less the same to me. There doesn't really seem to be any significant benefit for using anything else except for 8-bit 420. 422 gives you that little bit of a green tint, and the 10-bit thing doesn't really give you any visually perceptible quality improvement, so it doesn't really matter. In Resolve then, I think you get more easily better results by using a non-color management workflow, because then you have more freedom in actually seeing what kind of CST would work for you. Always I would change the levels from auto to full in Resolve, because auto then would interpret it as video. And then for the CST, use P3, Gamma 22 or DCI or 709 or something like that, and use always that instead of the LUT to make my life then in the grading phase easier. If somebody from Atomos is listening, then my wishes then would be that if you do anything now in a future level, please, make actually the clip to match what it says on the tin. So now when it says P365, perhaps you could put that as the metadata, so that if you use a color managed Resolve workflow, it will actually open it up in the same way as you indicate that the HDR has been created. As for the recording, I don't know whether it's possible, but of course it would be nice if the the 422 bit stuffing wouldn't create that additional sort of slight green tint. So if that's possible, then perhaps tweak the encoding there a little bit, if that's possible. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say today. Thanks for listening in. If you like the material, please subscribe. Camera Corner releases videos every now and then, and the more standard sailing and boating sites a little bit more often. So if you're interested in sailing, boating, and how to get around on the sea and waters in Finland, then please check Sail in Finland out, and perhaps even check out some material on photography and video every now and then. See you back here. Thank you. Bye-bye.